Gemini X smiled in court. He forgot I record everything I'm told not to forget. The crisp October air in Chicago carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant rumble of the L train as Sarah Jenkins made her way to the office each morning. For Sarah, a diligent paralegal in her late 20s, the routine was a comforting rhythm. Her Lincoln Park apartment, small but meticulously kept, overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street. Inside, shelves overflowed with legal texts and dog-eared novels, testaments to her sharp mind and quiet ambition. She worked for Sterling and Finch, a mid-sized law firm nestled in the heart of the Loop, its offices occupying 2 floors of a towering glass and steel monolith on Wacker Drive. Sarah was the kind of person who noticed the details others missed, who found quiet satisfaction in untangling complex legal precedents, in crafting perfectly cited footnotes. She wasn't flashy, didn't crave the spotlight, but her contributions were the bedrock upon which many successful cases were built. Her colleagues, the few who truly saw beyond her reserved demeanor, respected her meticulousness. The firm ran on people like Sarah, though they rarely got the public accolades. Her world, however, revolved significantly around Mark Thorne, her boyfriend of 3 years. Mark was a junior associate at Sterling and Finch, a year older than Sarah, with an undeniable charisma that drew people in. He had a quick wit, an easy smile, and an ambition that burned bright. Sarah had been captivated by him from the moment he joined the firm. They had bonded over late-night research sessions, the shared exhaustion of demanding cases, and the quiet dreams they whispered to each other over cheap takeout in their early days. He spoke of a future where they would build a life, perhaps even open their own practice someday, a small, impactful firm where justice truly mattered. Sarah believed him, poured her heart and intellect into his burgeoning career, seeing his success as their shared ascent. She'd spent countless evenings at their small, round kitchen table, a chipped ceramic mug of coffee steaming beside her, poring over his case files. She'd proofread his motions, offered critical insights into opposing counsel's strategies, and even drafted substantial portions of his arguments. Mark, in turn, would praise her, call her his secret weapon, his brilliant muse. He'd say, "I couldn't do this without you, Sarah. You're the brains behind the operation." His words, accompanied by a genuine smile and a squeeze of her hand, were all the reward she ever needed. She loved him, believed in their partnership, both professional and personal. Their future, a comfortable life in Chicago, perhaps a small house with a garden, seemed tangible within reach. They had talked about getting engaged by the end of the year. Lately, though, a subtle shift had occurred. Mark was spending more time at the office, often making excuses about client demands or partner meetings. He was less affectionate, more distracted. His charming smile sometimes felt forced, his eyes distant. Sarah, ever the observer, noticed the change but dismissed it, attributing it to the growing pressures of his career. He was on the cusp of a major promotion, a pivotal step towards becoming a senior associate. It required presenting a critical, high-stakes brief to the firm's most senior partners, a presentation that could make or break his trajectory. Sarah, as always, had been instrumental, burning the midnight oil for weeks, meticulously constructing the legal arguments, cross-referencing statutes, and polishing the language. It was, in essence, her masterpiece presented under his name. The air in the office grew thick with anticipation as Mark's presentation day approached. Sarah felt a nervous flutter in her stomach, a blend of pride and anxiety. She'd given him every piece of her knowledge, every ounce of her analytical skill. She watched him walk into the partners' conference room, a confident, polished figure in a charcoal suit, clutching the brief she had virtually written. A small, proud smile touched her lips. Later that afternoon, the news spread like wildfire through the firm. Mark Thorne had absolutely crushed it. The partners were reportedly impressed, his promotion virtually guaranteed. A celebratory mixer was announced for that evening in the firm's lavish reception area on the 20th floor, overlooking the glittering cityscape. Sarah felt a rush of warmth, a sense of shared triumph. She sent him a text message from her flip phone. "Congrats, Mark. So proud of you. See you tonight." He replied simply, "Thanks, SJ. Big night." Sarah arrived at the mixer, dressed in a tasteful navy dress she'd bought specifically for such occasions. The room buzzed with chatter, the clinking of glasses, and the low hum of success. She scanned the crowd for Mark, a smile ready on her face. Then she saw him. He was across the room, by the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathed in the twilight glow of the city. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, almost draped around his arm, was Emily Vance. Emily was the firm's newest junior associate, fresh out of an Ivy League law school, with a striking blonde mane, an impeccably tailored designer suit, and a family name that opened doors. Her father was Judge Arthur Vance, a highly influential figure in the Illinois judicial system. Sarah had seen them chatting, laughing over the past few weeks, but had brushed it off as professional networking. Now, it was undeniable. Mark's arm was casually, possessively, around Emily's waist. Their heads were close, sharing an intimate joke. As Sarah watched, Mark leaned in and kissed Emily, a lingering, public kiss that sent a cold shock through Sarah's system. The laughter, the music, the entire room seemed to fade into a distant echo. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, sickening rhythm. She felt a strange disconnect, as if she were watching a scene unfold in a movie, not living it. She felt a wave of nausea, a dizziness that threatened to buckle her knees. She wanted to disappear, to run, but her feet felt rooted to the polished marble floor. Then Mark spotted her. His eyes, usually warm and familiar, hardened almost imperceptibly. He detached himself from Emily, a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation, and began to walk towards Sarah, Emily trailing a few steps behind him, a smirk playing on her lips. Sarah braced herself, her breath catching in her throat. "Sarah," Mark said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth, carrying just enough to be heard by a few nearby colleagues who had paused their conversations, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "I think we need to talk." "Talk," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're kissing her, Mark, in front of everyone. What is there to talk about?" Mark sighed, a theatrical gesture of exasperation. "Look, Sarah, this isn't easy, but it's time." "This," he gestured vaguely between them, "isn't working. We're on different paths. My career is taking off, and frankly, I need someone who understands the demands. Someone who's at my level." He glanced at Emily, who was now standing beside him, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. "Emily and I, we have a real connection, a future." The words stung, each one a poisoned dart. Sarah felt her face flush, tears pricking at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Different paths? Is that what you call it, Mark? After everything?" "After I practically wrote that brief for you?" Mark laughed condescendingly. "Wrote it for me? Sarah, please, you're a paralegal. You compiled research, that's what you do. I conceptualized, drafted, presented. Don't flatter yourself. Your contributions were minimal, just organizational. Frankly, you've been a distraction, too emotional. I needed focus for this promotion, and you weren't cutting it." He paused, a cruel smile spreading. "And let's be honest, Sarah. You're talented, yes, for what you do, but you're not partnership material. You're content with the background, with footnotes. I'm aiming higher." Emily understands that. She's a rising star, a future partner. We're a power couple. You were just an assistant in more ways than one." The words hit her like a physical blow. "An assistant?" Her voice cracked. "I was your partner, Mark, your support, your friend." "Your girlfriend?" "Past tense, Sarah," Emily interjected, her voice smooth, cutting. "He made his choice." Sarah looked from Mark's cold, triumphant face to Emily's smug, satisfied one. The air suddenly felt too thin to breathe. Humiliation, red-hot and agonizing, washed over her. She felt like every eye in the room was on her, pitying, judging. Her vision blurred, the festive lights of the city outside the window turning into streaky blurs. She wanted to scream, to rail against the injustice, but the words were trapped in her throat, choked by unshed tears. With a last, agonizing glance at Mark, whose face now held only disdain, she turned, pushed through the stunned silence of the crowd, and fled the reception, the sound of their shared laughter, mocking and triumphant, ringing in her ears. The Chicago streets were a blur through Sarah's tear-filled eyes as she stumbled out of the high-rise, the cool night air doing little to extinguish the burning shame within her. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away, far from the gleaming towers that housed her shattered dreams. She walked aimlessly for what felt like hours, the familiar urban landscape transformed into an oppressive, indifferent maze. The rhythmic clang of the L became a dirge, the honking of taxis a cacophony of mockery. Each step was a battle against the rising tide of despair. She eventually found herself back in her small Lincoln Park apartment, the quiet solitude suddenly suffocating. The air still carried the faint scent of Mark's cologne from his last visit, a cruel phantom. She stripped off the navy dress, a symbol of her naive hope, and threw it into a crumpled heap on the floor. She collapsed onto her bed, the world shrinking to the confines of her small bedroom, where she cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen shut. Days bled into one another. Sarah didn't answer calls from concerned colleagues, ignored the insistent buzzing of her flip phone. She ordered takeout, leaving the containers untouched on the counter. Her once meticulous apartment descended into disarray, mirroring the chaos within her. Sleep offered no solace, only vivid, tormenting replays of Mark's sneering face, his dismissive words, Emily's triumphant smirk. The pain was a physical entity, a crushing weight on her chest, a constant ache behind her eyes. She felt foolish, naive, utterly used. How could she have been so blind? How could she have invested so much of herself, her intellect, her heart, into someone who saw her as nothing more than a convenient, disposable tool? The betrayal cut deeper than a mere breakup. It was a profound invalidation of her worth, her capabilities. He hadn't just broken her heart, he had trampled on her professional integrity. Thoughts of quitting her job, of packing a bag and simply vanishing from Chicago, flickered through her mind. What was the point? Her reputation, she imagined, was in tatters, whispered about in the break rooms. Every glance from a colleague would feel like an accusation, a pitying stare. The thought of facing them, of seeing Mark and Emily parading their new power couple status through the hallways, was unbearable. But amidst the crushing grief, a different emotion began to stir, slowly, like embers rekindling beneath ash. It started as a tiny spark of indignation, fueled by the memory of his condescending laughter. Just a paralegal. Too emotional. Not partnership material. The words echoed, no longer just inflicting pain, but igniting a slow-burning rage. She remembered the nights she'd stayed late, hunched over a glowing monitor, while Mark was out entertaining clients, or so he claimed. She remembered the countless hours she'd spent dissecting complex statutes, unearthing obscure precedents, crafting the very arguments that had secured his promotion. She had handed him his success on a silver platter, and he had thrown her aside like yesterday's trash, denying her very existence in his achievement. The injustice of it all was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. The anger hardened, crystallizing into a cold, clear resolve. She couldn't just vanish. She couldn't let him get away with it. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore. It was about her professional integrity, her identity, her very sense of self. Mark Thorne had not only betrayed her love but had systematically exploited her talent, then publicly humiliated her. He deserved to face consequences, not just for the breakup, but for the deliberate deceit and professional theft. The idea of vengeance, initially a foreign, dark thought, began to take root, morphing from a destructive impulse into a focused, almost righteous pursuit of justice. The anger, once a consuming fire, now settled into a cold, analytical resolve. Sarah pushed herself out of bed, the exhaustion still clinging to her like a shroud, but her mind was sharper, clearer than it had been in days. She walked over to her cluttered desk, pushing aside stacks of legal journals and a half-eaten box of cereal. Her gaze landed on a small, rectangular device nestled among a pile of pens and highlighters, her trusty digital voice recorder. It was an unassuming gadget, a silver Sony IC-DPX series from a few years back, slightly larger than a pack of gum, but incredibly reliable. Sarah had purchased it out of necessity, a habit she developed early in her paralegal career. In the fast-paced, high-stakes environment of legal work, details were everything. Memories could be fallible, and verbal instructions, often given in haste, could be misinterpreted. To ensure accuracy, to prevent misunderstandings, and simply because she was meticulously thorough, Sarah had started recording her discussions with Mark, especially when they were brainstorming case strategies, delegating research tasks, or outlining specific arguments for briefs. It wasn't a malicious act, it was a professional safeguard. She'd always informed Mark she was recording, at least initially, explaining it was for clarity and record-keeping. He'd barely paid attention, always too busy, too confident. Over time, he'd forgotten she even did it. The recorder became an invisible part of their work routine, tucked discreetly on a corner of the desk, or even in her purse during a coffee break discussion. Now, as she held the cold metal device in her hand, a flicker of hope, dark and potent, ignited within her. Could they be there? The undeniable proof of his deceit? Her fingers trembled slightly as she powered it on. The small LCD screen glowed to life. She scrolled through the files, each one labeled by date and a cryptic subject. Her heart pounded as she recognized familiar timestamps. She plugged in her headphones, needing absolute clarity. She started listening, chronologically, from the earliest recordings when their relationship was still vibrant, professional boundaries often blurring into personal ones. She listened to their late-night sessions, her voice animated, his appreciative. Then the tone began to shift. She heard her own voice, presenting a complex argument for a key component of Mark's promotion brief. So, the corporate veil-piercing angle, if we apply the alter ego theory to their subsidiary in Delaware, we can argue for direct liability. Mark's voice, calm and dismissive. Good, Sarah. Flesh that out. Write up a preliminary draft, I'll review it. It's solid, but I need to put my own spin on it, for the partners. She heard herself meticulously outlining the structure, the specific case law. He then took full credit for his brilliant strategy in subsequent internal meetings recorded on her device. Further in, the recordings grew darker. She found files from weeks ago, after he had started distancing himself. Snippets of phone calls, clearly Mark's voice, lowered, almost conspiratorial. Look, Emily, she's useful, yeah, but she's just a paralegal. A means to an end. This promotion, it's mine, and it needs a certain image. She doesn't fit the mold, you do. Another fragment. Yeah, still living with her for now. Don't worry, it's temporary. Just need to tie up loose ends, make sure I get everything I need from her for this brief. Then, easy break. It'll be messy, she's emotional, but who cares, right? My career is paramount. Sarah sat frozen, listening to the chilling, calculated betrayal unfold through the tiny earbuds. Each word was a fresh stab, but also a hardening of her resolve. He had systematically used her, not just professionally, but personally, meticulously planning her demise from his life even as she was pouring her heart and soul into his success. His arrogance was monumental, his disregard for her humanity absolute. He truly believed he was untouchable. She continued, driven by a grim determination. There were recordings of him telling her, just days before the mixer, "Sarah, I need you to triple-check those citations tonight. It's crucial. I'm counting on you. Our future depends on this." All while he was actively planning to discard her. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave. These weren't just professional records. They were a devastating chronicle of his duplicity, both professional and personal. They exposed him as a liar, a manipulator, and a thief of intellectual labor. And he had, in his towering arrogance, forgotten that she recorded everything I'm told not to forget. He had forgotten her meticulous nature, her habit, her silent vigilance. The initial plan of simply exposing him within the firm felt too small, too contained. Mark was well-connected, charming. He might spin it, twist it, diminish her. She wanted something bigger, something public, undeniable, something that would dismantle his carefully constructed facade piece by agonizing piece. She wouldn't just tear down his career, she would expose his rotten core to the world. She spent the next several days in a meticulous, almost robotic state, sifting through hundreds of audio files. She created a detailed timeline, cross-referencing dates with specific projects, transcribing damning excerpts word for word. She highlighted the instances where he took credit for her work, where he disparaged her, where he openly plotted his betrayal. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. This wasn't about rage anymore, it was about strategy. She understood the legal system, how evidence was presented, how narratives were shaped. She wouldn't lash out wildly. She would play the long game. She needed to present this evidence in a forum where it could not be dismissed, where it would have maximum impact. Not a firm-level HR complaint, but a court of law. She would sue him. Not just for emotional distress, though that was certainly applicable, but for the financial value of her intellectual property, for the professional opportunities stolen, for the calculated fraud of her labor. She would force him into a public arena where her recordings, her truth, could finally speak. She didn't go back to Sterling and Finch immediately. She took a week of sick leave, claiming a severe flu. During that time, she quietly started researching law firms, looking for one known for ethical practices, for taking on cases against larger, more powerful entities, for representing the wronged individual. She found a small, tenacious firm specializing in intellectual property and professional misconduct, located just outside the Loop in a more unassuming building. She booked an appointment under an assumed name, unwilling to tip her hand just yet. The quiet, unassuming paralegal was gone. In her place was a woman with a chillingly clear purpose, armed with undeniable truth and ready for war. Sarah's first meeting with Evelyn Reed, the senior partner at Reed and Associates, was a revelation. Evelyn was sharp, no-nonsense, with eyes that missed nothing. Sarah laid out her story, calmly, clinically, presenting her meticulously organized transcriptions and a summary of the audio evidence. She played a few key snippets. Evelyn listened, her expression shifting from professional skepticism to a grim appreciation. "This is compelling, Miss Jenkins," Evelyn had said, turning off the recorder Sarah had brought. "The personal betrayal aside, the professional misconduct, the exploitation of your intellectual labor under false pretenses, that's a strong case, especially with these recordings. Mark Thorne's career, and potentially Sterling and Finch's reputation, could be seriously impacted." Sarah nodded. "I don't want a backroom settlement, Miss Reed. I want this in open court. I want him to face this publicly." Evelyn's lips curved into a thin smile. "Understood. This won't be easy. Sterling and Finch will defend him vigorously to protect their image. But we have a strong hand here." They decided to pursue a civil suit for intellectual property theft, breach of implied contract, for her contributions made under the guise of a shared future, and damages for emotional distress and professional defamation. The firm served Mark Thorne with papers weeks later. The legal battle began. Mark's initial reaction, as Sarah had predicted, was dismissive. He considered the lawsuit a desperate, pathetic attempt by a scorned ex. He hired the best defense lawyers Sterling and Finch could provide, confident that his charm and connections would prevail. He and Emily Vance continued to flaunt their relationship, often seen together at firm events, their public displays of affection a calculated jab at Sarah. Sarah, now working remotely for Reed and Associates while her suit progressed, meticulously assisted Evelyn, providing every piece of information she could recall, every nuance of Mark's character. She maintained a quiet, unwavering resolve, keeping the full extent of her audio evidence a secret, even from Evelyn, until the critical moment. Months passed. Depositions were held, interrogatories answered. Mark, ever the arrogant showman, was smooth, convincing, denying everything, twisting facts, painting Sarah as an unstable, vengeful woman. He smirked through the process, his eyes betraying no hint of guilt, only disdain. Emily often accompanied him, a silent, disapproving presence. The day of the preliminary hearing finally arrived, a crisp, cold morning in early spring. Sarah, dressed in a simple, professional suit, felt a nervous flutter, but it was overshadowed by a quiet, fierce determination. She walked into the Cook County Courthouse, the grand, imposing building feeling both daunting and, for the first time, like a sanctuary of potential justice. The courtroom was sparsely filled for a preliminary hearing, but a few local legal reporters were present, drawn by the high-profile names involved. Mark Thorne sat at the defense table, next to his slick, high-powered lawyer from Sterling and Finch. He caught Sarah's eye and offered a small, mocking smile, a subtle, patronizing gesture that seemed to say, "You're wasting your time, little girl." Emily Vance sat in the gallery, a picture of supportive elegance, occasionally whispering to Mark's lawyer. Mark looked utterly confident, completely at ease, entirely in control. The proceedings began. Evelyn Reed, calm and authoritative, presented their initial arguments, detailing Sarah's contributions, the implied partnership, the subsequent betrayal. Mark's lawyer countered, painting Sarah as a disgruntled former employee, exaggerating her role, seeking revenge for a failed relationship. Then, Mark Thorne was called to the stand. He took the oath, his voice clear and resonant. He recounted his version of events, smooth and polished, denying any significant intellectual contribution from Sarah, attributing all success to his own brilliance. He dismissed their relationship as casual, claiming Sarah had become overly attached and unprofessional. "Mr. Thorne," Evelyn asked, her voice even, "did Miss Jenkins contribute significantly to the research and drafting of the Sterling brief that secured your promotion?" Mark leaned into the microphone, his eyes flicking to Sarah, a triumphant glint in them. He smiled, a slow, condescending curve of his lips. "Absolutely not, Miss Reed. Sarah is a paralegal. She performed administrative tasks. Research, yes, for citation checks. But the core arguments, the conceptual framework, the strategic insights, those were entirely mine. To suggest otherwise is frankly preposterous. She was just my assistant." He paused, looking directly at Sarah, a cruel glint in his eyes. "She often became emotional, you see, not the kind of focus one needs for high-level legal work." He smiled again, confident, arrogant, convinced he had sealed her fate with his smooth lies. He truly believed he was untouchable. He forgot she recorded everything she was told not to forget. Evelyn Reed nodded slowly. "I see. And during the period leading up to your promotion, Mr. Thorne, were you in a romantic relationship with Miss Vance?" Mark hesitated, a microsecond. "No, not officially. Emily and I developed a professional rapport. Our relationship began after my relationship with Miss Jenkins had effectively ended. There was no overlap." Evelyn approached the bench, a small, unassuming digital voice recorder in her hand. "Your Honor, we have new evidence to present, which directly contradicts Mr. Thorne's testimony regarding both his professional and personal conduct during the period in question." Mark's smile faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. His lawyer leaned forward, a frown creasing his brow. "Permission to play audio evidence, Your Honor?" Evelyn asked. The judge, a stern, elderly woman named Justice Albright, looked at Mark's lawyer. "Any objections, Mr. Davies?" Mark's lawyer, clearly blindsided, stammered, "Your Honor, we were not informed of any such evidence." "It came to light recently, Your Honor, as Miss Jenkins reviewed her personal archives," Evelyn stated, her eyes locking onto Mark's. "It is highly relevant and was previously held back to ensure its impact at the appropriate moment." Justice Albright, known for her strict adherence to procedural fairness, but also her intolerance for deceit, ruled, "Given its potential relevance, I will allow a short segment. However, its admissibility will be determined after review." Evelyn took the stand, connected the recorder to the courtroom's audio system. A slight hiss filled the room. Then, Mark Thorne's voice, clear as a bell, filled the courtroom. Recording Mark's voice, lowered, conspiratorial. "Look, Emily, she's useful, yeah, but she's just a paralegal. A means to an end. This promotion, it's mine, and it needs a certain image. She doesn't fit the mold, you do. Yeah, still living with her for now. Don't worry, it's temporary. Just need to tie up loose ends, make sure I get everything I need from her for this brief. Then, easy break. It'll be messy, she's emotional, but who cares, right? My career is paramount. Date, 2 weeks before the mixer. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Emily Vance in the gallery turned chalk white, her eyes wide with shock, staring at Mark with a mixture of horror and disgust. Mark, on the stand, had gone rigid. His smug smile had completely vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated panic. His face was beet red, his eyes darting frantically between Sarah, Evelyn, and the judge. Evelyn then played another snippet. Recording Sarah's voice, animated. So, the corporate veil-piercing angle, if we apply the alter ego theory to their subsidiary in Delaware, we can argue for direct liability. Recording Mark's voice, dismissive. Good, Sarah. Flesh that out. Write up a preliminary draft, I'll review it. It's solid, but I need to put my own spin on it, for the partners. Date, 1 month before the mixer. The second snippet directly contradicted Mark's testimony about his sole authorship. The courtroom was silent, except for the faint whir of the recorder. Justice Albright's gaze, sharp and piercing, was fixed on Mark. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice like steel, "do you wish to revise your previous testimony regarding Miss Jenkins' contributions and the timeline of your personal relationships?" Mark stammered, his polished composure utterly shattered. "Your Honor, I don't recall. I mean, those recordings, they're out of context, manipulated." His voice trailed off, pathetic and unconvincing. "Manipulated?" Evelyn interjected, her voice cutting through his feeble protest. "The device stores immutable timestamps. The audio is raw and unedited, recorded during professional discussions which you were aware were being recorded for accuracy." Justice Albright slammed her gavel down, the sound echoing through the stunned courtroom. "Mr. Thorne, you are advised to consult with your counsel immediately. Perjury is a serious offense. This hearing is adjourned until tomorrow morning. Mr. Davies, I suggest you have a very frank discussion with your client. Miss Reed, this evidence is provisionally admitted, and I commend your discretion." The aftermath was swift and brutal. The few reporters present scrambled, their pens flying across notepads, sensing a major scandal. News of Mark Thorne's perjury and the damning recordings hit the local legal news circuit that very evening. The next morning, Mark Thorne did not appear in court. His lawyer, a pale and grim-faced Mr. Davies, informed Justice Albright that his client had abruptly withdrawn from the firm, citing personal reasons, and would be settling with Miss Jenkins out of court. The settlement, which covered the full financial value of Sarah's intellectual labor, damages for emotional distress, and a public apology from Mark Thorne, was substantial, far exceeding anything Sarah had initially hoped for. But the real consequence for Mark was far more devastating. Sterling and Finch, desperate to protect its reputation, immediately disavowed him, revoking his senior associate promotion and publicly distancing themselves. His legal career, built on a foundation of deceit, collapsed spectacularly. Emily Vance was reportedly seen cleaning out her desk at the firm a week later. No longer the power couple she aspired to be with Mark, her father's influence unable to save her from the public shame of being associated with a liar and a cheat. Mark Thorne vanished from the Chicago legal scene, his name synonymous with professional and personal betrayal. The confident smile he had worn in court had become his undoing. Sarah, though financially compensated and publicly vindicated, felt a profound emptiness. Revenge was complete, justice served, but betrayal's scars remained, reminders of blind trust. She used the settlement to start fresh, opting for a senior paralegal position at a smaller, highly respected ethical firm. She moved to a new apartment with a clear Lake Michigan view, a boundless horizon. She still carried her small digital voice recorder, now a safeguard and a symbol of her resilience. A harsh lesson learned, but also the strength of her own resolve. The Chicago air, once tainted, now carried the fresh scent of a new beginning, earned through fire and truth.